It's a good time of year, but I want us to remember that this is the time of year. It's all about the Christmas presents or the pies or not that I shouldn't be getting Christmas presents, Kim, and pies. But it's not about all those things. It's not about the carols. It's not about all the things that we do. Those things are wonderful. Those things are great. But it's about who we are celebrating this time of year. And the thing that has overwhelmed me this week. Now you cannot. I've told you many times I don't ever know what I'm going to preach about from week to week. But when the time comes, I have been overwhelmed. I've been itching to teach and to preach about the stories of Jesus and the baby and all this. But I have been overwhelmed about who is this Jesus? Who is it that we're going to be celebrating? Who is this little baby that was born in the manger? And these are the things that I want to speak about today. And I just love these stories. I want to talk about how Mary reacted to the news of the angel. I want to talk about how Joseph reacted when other men had left that woman alone and he stuck by her side. I want to talk about the amazement that the shepherds had as they stood in that field. Can you imagine it? As they stood in that field in the pitch darkness, and these angels came and proclaimed the Messiah had come. I want to talk about the wise men that traveled for months. These rich wise men that came and they kneeled down in front of a peasant lady's child and brought gifts and worshiped him. Can you imagine all these things? I am so itching to talk about them. But I know that before I do this, I have got to talk about who this Jesus is. I want you to turn to John chapter 1. And we're going to read it in a minute. John chapter 1, we're going to read the first 18 verses, but I'm going to speak today on the first 4. So be thinking about that. Just keep your finger in that place. I want to share a story with you. There was a story about a king who fell in love with this peasant maiden. And the king was the wealthiest. He was the most respected, most powerful king there ever was. And no one dared oppose him or speak a word against him. But this king, as powerfully as he was, had a problem. How could he tell this maiden that he loved her? And how could he know for sure that she loved him? The very fact that he was rich and famous and powerful was his barrier, was his problem. And he could lead an armed escort of knights to that young girl's cottage and demand, because of his authority to the king, that you will marry the king. And he didn't want to do that. He didn't want a fearful slave as his wife. He wanted someone that would share his life together, that would love him and honor him. He could shower with gifts and jewels and pearls and all these other things. And he knew that wouldn't work either. He didn't want to buy her love. He wanted her to love him for herself, not the gifts that he had to offer. Somehow he had to find a way to win this maiden's love without overwhelming her, without destroying her free will. Somehow he had to make himself her equal. So the king clothed himself in rags and he went to her as a peasant. But the truly amazing thing is the king didn't merely disguise himself. He actually became poor. He actually gave up his rights as the king. He actually gave up everything because he loved this girl so dearly that he wanted her to be his wife. And this is a story. This is a beautiful story, a beautiful parable about the story of Jesus. It's told by John in this gospel. Jesus the King, the Creator, the source of light, the source of life. How he renounced his throne, his wealth, his kingly power to win her love. Win our love. God himself came as a poor, humble, limited human being, subject to hunger, pain, temptation, death. He's come because he loves us, and he has come to win our love. And that is what I want to talk about, this king. This is the one I want to speak about today. This is the story of Christmas. I love to read the Gospel of John. Do you ever read it? Do you ever read the other 3 Gospels and you read this one? It's just different. You read it and you say, it's so poetic, it's so beautiful. It's written differently. It is a book of love. It is like a love story as you read this book. As you try to understand what John is trying to say. Now, John wrote this book. He wrote it somewhere around in 85 or 90 AD. He was an old man when he wrote it. It's believed that he wrote it in the city of Ephesus, where he was staying there as he was leading this new church that was in this particular area. Now, the other Gospels had already been written, and they were already around. And the interesting thing is, you read about this particular one, you'll see that John didn't put all the things in his Gospel as are in the other 3 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And you wonder why. Why did John not include some of the things that he put in there? And as I've studied it so many times, I've studied these particular Gospels. I see the same Jesus, this one that was born in a manger, this one that was born a poor man, this guy that preached around Galilee for all his life. And his life was only 33 years, okay? 33 years old. He didn't preach but 3 of them. He never left home until he was 30 years old to begin his ministry. As I preach about him, I wonder, what is it that John's trying to tell me about him? What's different about him that John is trying to say? And John, he attacks this question headstrong in the very first few verses. The first 4 verses, he attacks this. And what he is saying, that Jesus is God. If you turn to your Bibles now, I want you to read. We're going to turn and read verses 1 through 18 in the Gospel of John. Chapter 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Now we're going to come back and hit these in a little more detail in a minute. Through Him all things were made. Without Him nothing was made that has been made. In Him was life, and that life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, but the darkness has not understood it. There came a man who was sent from God. His name was John. He came as a witness to testify concerning that light, so that through him all men might believe. He himself was not the light. He came only as a witness to the light. The true light that gives light to every man was coming into the world. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all who received him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision, or a husband's will, but born of God. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only. He came from the Father, full of grace and truth. John testifies concerning him. He cries out saying, "This was the one, this is he whom I said, he who comes after me has surpassed me, because he was before me." Listen to all these words. From the fullness of his grace, we have all received one blessing after another. For the law has given through Moses, grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God but God, the one and only, who is the Father's side, at the Father's side, has made him known. God asked us this question, or he asked the question, who is this Jesus that we look at? And he answers the question by portraying Jesus as the central figure in human history. Okay? In the first few verses, we discover the crucial fact about Christianity. Christianity is about a person. It's not about a theology. It's not about a thought. It is about a person. You take Jesus out of the equation, we have nothing. And see, what people do so many times, and you see it in this world today, they teach the morality of Jesus, but they don't teach Jesus. They say that everybody can come to God through a moral life. That's not true. It is only through Christ that we are saved. Trying to understand Christianity without understanding Christ is kind of like saying, I want to know why there's light in the daytime, but I don't want to talk about that nonsense about the sun. Okay? That's what we've got to understand. If you're going to understand Christianity and our salvation, you have got to understand who Jesus Christ is. Christianity is not merely what Jesus taught, but who Jesus is. It's impossible for anyone today to deny that Jesus was an extraordinary, influential, revolutionary person. There has been more books written about Jesus than anybody else, than any other person in the world's history. There's been more songs written about Jesus. There's been more art drawn about Christ than any other person there ever was. Why? Why was he so great? Why was he so important? He preached 3.5 years. That was it. And all of these things have been written about him. All these things have been said about him. All this great poetry and books and